Hello everyone and welcome to the Screw the System channel. This is part 3 of my YouTube interview series called Pursue Your Passion. Now today I have a very special guest. It is Tom Butler-Bowdon. He is my writing mentor, helped me with my first book, Escape the System. He is also an author, a very successful published author with a series of books from 50 self-help classics. We've got 50 spiritual classics, 50 success classics, recently 50 economics classics, which won an Axiom award. His whole series has sold over 500,000 copies in English, and I think the same in foreign languages. And he's also got this very good book as well, Never Too Late to Be Great. Tom had a very interesting journey. It's 15 years, I think, he's been a full-time author, and we're going to explore that journey, explore what led him to change from, I think, a political advisor, is that right?
Yes.
A political advisor to being a full-time author. We're going to explore that transition. First of all, I'll tell you guys a little bit about how we met. I first met Tom back in 2007. I'd read his first book in the series, which was the 50 self-help classics. I really enjoyed it. Discovered that he lived in Oxford and thought, who better could there be out there, probably in the world, to help me write a self-help book than this guy. Fortunately, he was very gracious and friendly in helping me. Over a series of about 2 or 3 years, I think, I made trips up to Oxford to show him my book, chapter by chapter. Changed after a while. I think the very first title I presented him with was How to Live Your Dreams, and he came up with the idea that I should probably go more in the direction of Screw the System, which then changed into Escape the System. Anyway, that's how we met. I'm now going to ask Tom some questions, find out about his journey. So Tom, what I'm interested to know is, actually, before I ask you some questions, if you could start with you talking about what you were doing before you transitioned into becoming a full-time author.
Right, yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I used to work as a government advisor when I was in Australia. So writing briefing notes and advice for ministers, and getting a lot of information and putting it into like a page. A lot of different issues like climate change and agriculture. So that was quite an exciting time for me, but there was always something niggling away. I started getting interested more in personal development, and I came over to the UK and so I did a master's degree, and I had this option of going back to my previous career, but then I thought I would love to do something to do with personal development and writing. So as you mentioned, there was still a period, several years really, transitioning from this career I'd had, well-paid, comfortable, safe career, to being a writer. So it was several years transitioning into that. So yeah, it didn't happen overnight.
So you wouldn't say, so it wasn't actually in your case, it wasn't a case of you being dissatisfied in your previous job. You were enjoying it and you could see yourself there in the future?
Not exactly. Although I enjoyed it and it was exciting, I couldn't see myself doing it in like 10 or 20 years time. It wasn't really individual enough to do with me. So that's why I thought I should pursue my passion, which was personal development. I'd read books like The 7 Habits, Stephen Covey, Anthony Robbins. I thought, all this stuff is amazing. And I just thought this little idea came into my mind. Would it be possible to create a career around this new area of personal development? And for me, it was then. And then I started thinking, how could I do it? Be a speaker or a writer or start a business. So that was the genesis of it. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just thought, this is an area I want to work in.
Sure. And so although I kind of got a hint at what might be the answer from what you were saying earlier, but what gave you that idea to come up with what I think is a very good idea of the 50, looking at a field, so self-help, success, spirituality, economics, psychology, and saying, I think your first book was the self-help one. So what gave you that initial idea to say, right, why don't I condense these 50 classic books in the genre and pick out their best insights? I know I was aware you mentioned that when you were working as a political advisor, you would condense work down into a single page.
Yeah.
So you obviously realised you had that skill, but what made you think, right, I want to put it as in the 50 self-help classics as your first one is?
Well, I mean, the thing is, at the time, which was in the 90s, self-help, personal development, success was still a sort of emerging genre. And for me, there was no guide to the whole genre, number one. And number two, it was seen as a pretty sort of lowbrow field. And I disagreed with that general consensus. I thought this is an amazing field of literature. It should really be properly analysed, looked at, put together. So that's why I thought I'll take my skills and my interests and I'll put the two things together. And I thought, why don't you just start writing about the whole field and the books I love, start taking notes, and then maybe I can sort of turn this into a book, which is the book that I wanted to read, which was a guide to all the best ideas, people, the best thoughts in this new emerging field.
That's interesting. You mentioned the book you wanted to read, and I think very much with my first book, Escape the System, that was the book I wanted to read. Now I've just about to release my second one as well. I'd say it's not so much the book I want to read, it was more written because of a comment on my YouTube channel, but I definitely know about this. I want that book out to be out there. It's not out there, so I better create it.
Yeah.
So now what I want to know is, you mentioned there was a transitional period from being a political advisor to being a full-time author, and I assume that had its moments which were quite tough, or where you were thinking, where's the money going to come from? So if you could let us know what got you through that period in your life, I think maybe our viewers would find that useful.
It is tough because you have this very clear idea in your mind of what you want to do, where you want to get to. And I was already seeing myself as like a published author years before I was, but it's hard to convince like friends and family, they still think of you in your previous career. So, and it also like cost me a relationship as well, because that person didn't believe like my vision for where I wanted to go. So there's that side of it, and then there's the financial one, which was after I left my previous career. For several years I was like doing temping jobs or working 3 or 4 days a week somewhere, so I still had the money coming in, but at the same time writing, building that side of it. So this whole idea of like suddenly leaving your job to pursue your passion, I think is pretty misguided. If you do leap upon something you want to do, don't do it in a crazy way. Have a sort of plan in place so that you don't alienate everyone around you, and you're not like living under a bridge while you move towards your passion. So yeah, there were times, difficult times, like emotionally, financially, where you thought, this is a high cost. I never thought that I'm not going to make it or do it. For some reason I had total belief, but it still had costs. So if you're on this path, just be aware of that. Do you have the passion, do you have the why to get through all the hows, as Viktor Frankl put it?
Yes. Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I didn't realise that you always had that belief that you were going to do it. I'm sure a lot of people experience doubts. I know I had myself as well, but that's very interesting. Perhaps that belief was part of the reason why it all came together.
Yeah.
So we're going to finish part 1 of the interview now, but join us in part 2, where we're going to explore some of the insights from Tom's books, and also some of the insights he has from his own journey as well. So join us in part 2 after this short break. So welcome back. This is part 2 of the interview, and I'm now going to talk to Tom a little bit about his writing process and some of the books he's read, and then condensed into his 50 classic series. So I've had another writer on the show. It was actually the first interview I did was with Thibaut Maurice, and I like to get a bit of an insight into how writers work. So what I'm interested to learn, Tom, is do you work a fixed amount of hours each day, or do you say you have to write a certain number of words?
Well, usually if I'm writing to a book contract, there'll be a deadline. So if I've got a year to write a book, I just work backwards and work out how much I have to do every week. So that's the sort of plain truth of it. But in terms of within a day, morning is always my high productivity time. Really, the earlier I can start in the day and then work through to lunchtime, that's where all the key stuff gets done. The afternoon tends to be a bit more stuff that requires less bandwidth. So often you ask writers how much work are they getting done, and they're sort of looking at their phone all the time.
Yeah.
You know, I was lucky in that I started writing before smartphones became all these distractions we have now. So that guy Jonathan Franzen, the US novelist, he said it's pretty hard to be a novelist if you've got an internet connection even. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got to be in a room or somewhere where it's just you and the book. Mm. If you've got distractions, pinging stuff going off all the time, you're just not going to get books written.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree entirely, and I'm a little envious of your schedule as well. Tom being a full-time author, me having to still continue my tennis coaching and my hypnotherapy work while I'm working towards that. I don't have the luxury of necessarily getting a whole morning in. I might be still writing from 10:30 to 11:30 at night just to get an hour in, because I haven't had much time throughout the day at other points. So obviously you've read a huge amount of books. I don't know how many are in your series in total, 6 or 7? In the whole series?
There's actually 9, so 9. I've covered 450 books. 450
books, which is incredible.
But each one's like a sort of mini essay.
Yeah, so there's an incredible amount of knowledge in your mind, and that's why I went to him to help me with my first book. So I'm sort of interested to know, across all of these books you've read and all of the insights in the books, if you could tell me maybe 3 or 4, both either books or insights that you have found really valuable.
Well, I mean, in terms of books, a good way to see it is which ones have sort of challenged me the most. I mean, it was natural for me to cover the whole self-help, success, motivational field, which I did in my first 2 books, and in a way they were reasonably easy to write. But when I've written a book like about the classics in philosophy, you know, that really, it's a big mind spin about some of the greats. So a lot of those books do stay with me, you know, Aristotle and Heidegger and Sartre, and you know, these are books that people spend their whole life on. So that's one tip, is, you know, if you can handle it, read some difficult philosophy books as well as like your personal development, because it can really expand your mind. So I love, in terms of books, I love all the classics in motivation, like Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill and, you know, Stephen Covey. So I love all these classics, but I really love great business writing as well. We've been discussing Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog, about the early days of Nike, for instance, which is an amazing read. I love these narrative business stories about, a bit like we're doing today. You look at a fully grown company as just, you know, a shining success on the hill, very successful, but people don't know about the early days and the struggles, just how difficult it was. So if you're ever finding your pursuing your passion difficult, just read a great business biography about the early days, you know, of the startup, what it was like. and that will give you confidence and inspiration to move forward.
Yeah, and it's great you mentioned Shoe Dog, because you get to see just how many obstacles Phil Knight had to go through with Nike in the early days. I mean, it's unbelievable. Lawsuits, competition from other providers in the US of the shoes. It just seems that he bounces from one obstacle to the other. So that is a really good and it's an exciting read as well.
And he didn't earn a salary from Nike for 5 years after it was set up. So again, we're talking about this transitioning thing. He was working as an accountant during the day, and 5-6 years before he could actually work full time on his own business.
Yes, it's a good point. And you mentioning that you were doing temping?
Yeah, I did office temping. Yeah,
because in my soon-to-be released book, How to Create an Income Without Working a Boring Job, I talk about, where is it? There. I talk about the 3 parts to getting paid to play. Now, Tom, from what I actually didn't realise, I thought he'd followed what I call the adventurous path, which was just quit your job and go for your idea, whereas it turns out he was more following the strategist path, which is what I do as well, which is balancing sort of part-time work in order to free up some more hours so that you can dedicate more time towards getting your passion done. It's probably the wisest strategy, although in my book you will find some examples of people who do follow the adventurous path and just go for it, quit their job and go for it, and are able to be successful, although it might be a little riskier. So final question, Tom. I want to know from your personal journey, I think you were saying 15, 16 years, or probably longer if you consider that from the time you had the idea to now being a full-time successful author, what are probably the 3 main lessons you've learned that have helped you during this time?
Well, a key one, I think, which is what I wrote about in this book, The Never Too Late to Be Great, which is this idea of thinking long. Because most of us are living longer lives now, and we've got time for 2 or 3 or more careers. So don't think that if you're in your late 20s or late 30s or late 40s or whatever, that you don't have enough time. The way things are working out for us now, you do have enough time to pursue what you want in 99% of cases. So for me, often it felt like, all my friends are out like with proper careers and earning decent money and everything, and I was like starting a writing career. But now things came good, and I realised you do have enough time, so that's really important. And also that you should just life. You can't think that life will go on forever in terms of being happy with what you're doing, even if you're not really fully into it. So as well as there being more time than you think, it's sort of irresponsible not to pursue your passion in the long term, because of all the costs that it brings to your inner soul or whatever, and also in your relationships. Like I mentioned before, like some people will not be happy that you go out on a limb, but if you're not happy in yourself, then at the end of the day that'll be a bit toxic in your relationship with friends and family. So although you have to take account of other people, ultimately your responsibility is to yourself. It's your life, so you have to pursue your passion, really. And the third thing is, don't be crazy in that you just work all the time pursuing your passion and never take a break. Like every week I have a day where I don't do anything to do with work. I'm not on email, I'm not on Facebook or anything. I'm out going for a walk or a cycle, I'm spending time in nature. So have this every time you're weak. Like in the Jewish community, they call it a Sabbath, Friday evening to Sunday morning. They don't lift a finger. And I totally agree with that. you've got to have this time in your week where you sort of cleanse your mind, and you'll find that by doing that, you'll come back to your work fully refreshed and you'll be better at it.
Yeah, if you follow Tom's Instagram, you can see some of his pictures when he has his days off and he's goes for a walk or a holiday. Actually went on quite a few holidays. Was it last year, I think? Or
yeah.
I remember kept seeing. I was wondering if you were taking more than just a day off. Or you're having a few months break. But he definitely. That's a good thing I see with Tom. He definitely has a lot of balance in his life, and I think that is really important as well. So it's been great interviewing you, Tom. Thanks for coming along. Is the best place for them to go your website if they want to check out your work or your Amazon page?
Yeah, just put Tom Butler-Bowdon into Google and a whole lot of stuff will come up. My website, primarily, all the books are on Amazon. If you put in the 50 Classics series, all my books will come up in Amazon. So yeah, you start with Google me.
Cool. And if you're too lazy to do that, I will put his links in the description below, so you can get a link straight to his website and to his Amazon page. So great to have him here. There are going to be more interviews coming up, so stay tuned, and I will see you in the next one.